All right, turn it up and stand back. You're about to feel our reach. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for
Hard Starboard Radio.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
No, Jasmius. We've made it to Thursday, almost made it to the upcoming weekend, but not quite. Not quite. We have today, we have tomorrow, and then the promised land for those who aren't involuntarily retired. But this is the Hard Starboard Radio Network. This is what I have been commissioned to do, in a manner of speaking. The Hard Starboard Radio Network, blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. I am your host. As always, once again, we're about 5 or 6 weeks into the return of weekday podcasts at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. Yes, I'm your host, Jasmius, your ruler, your benevolent despot, your fountain rabbi of conservatism, constitutionalism, Christianity, common sense, your conservative Ronin. Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Call-in number 646-478-5068. Email address, jasmius@comcast.net. I am on Twitter at Jasmius, capital J, capital A, capital S, lowercase M-I-U-S, and your repository of education, edification, enlightenment, and entertainment in all your life's endeavors, youtube.com/Hard Starboard Radio. And I would urge y'all, I would urge all of you in Hard Starboard Nation, outside of Hard Starboard Nation, if you're outside of Hard Starboard Nation, well, get your ass into Hard Starboard Nation. What the hell's wrong with you? Please. But I would urge us all to pray for Senator John McCain today, because it came out today that in the course of the procedure that he was undergoing to remove a blood clot from, it was in his eye or right above his eye, somewhere around his eye. It's one of those things that, you know how when you're elderly or even advanced middle age, and you go for a checkup and then they find a little something and then that leads to something else and then holy crap, well, I mean, that happened to a boss I had once. Yeah, in fact, he hadn't had a physical in like 26 years or something, and so his daughters begged him, you know, give it. This can be our Christmas present, but get yourself get a checkup, Dad. Go get yourself looked at by a doctor, get updated so you know you're in good health. And it turned out that they found a little something which led to something else, which led to this test, which led to that test, and they found that he had a heart attack sometime in the preceding 18 months without realizing it, and he was within weeks at most, perhaps days or even hours, of a massive heart attack that would have killed him stone cold dead. And then he wound up having to get quadruple bypass surgery. So sometimes these things happen. And something similar happened to Senator John McCain. He went for a checkup or maybe something like that, and they found that he had a blood clot above or in or around one of his eyes. And then it was announced last night that they found cancerous tissue in his brain. John McCain has brain cancer, ladies and gentlemen. It's evocative of when Ted Kennedy's brain cancer was discovered 7 years ago. And, it should go without saying that some issues transcend and override partisanship. Brain cancer should be one of them. And really, I guess, it should go without saying that some issues ought to transcend and override partisanship. Brain cancer should be one of them. It's just terrible. It sucks that we live in an age when that even needs to be said and cannot be said with any reasonable degree of confidence. Now, Senator John McCain is many things. I wouldn't call him a war hero, but he has more courage than any of us have. Because remember what he did when he was at the Hanoi Hilton. He could, because he was the son of an American admiral, he could have gotten and received and taken preferential treatment and could have gotten out. VC was willing to release him, send him home, but he refused to accept preferential treatment. He refused to take an out that was not also available to his buddies, his fellow prisoners in the Hanoi Hilton. And so he refused it, turned it down. He said, I will leave only when all of my friends can come with me. And so that was fairly early on in his stay in the Hanoi Hilton. And so he was in there for 7 years, ladies and gentlemen. 7 years, tortured on a daily basis. I mean, whatever else you can say about John McCain, he suffered things that none of us have ever suffered. And he did so by choice, not because he wanted to be tortured, but because he refused to leave his comrades behind. So I don't know if that makes him a war hero, but it does make him ballsier than any of us will ever be. And in his own way, more principled as well. So, he may not be a war hero, but he is courageous. He has courage without peer, put it that way. And, I have definite political differences with the man. I always have. But he's also a fine man with whom each of us has had, even though each of us has had disagreements with him, he is also one of the few people in Washington with a consistent record against wasteful spending and was opposed to earmarks well before the Tea Party ever existed. And beyond that, Senator McCain is a husband, a father, and a friend to many. He has fought many a great fight, and this will be another fight that he must tackle. I have no doubt that those of us of faith can help him through our prayers. to give his doctors wisdom and skill and knowledge, to give his family comfort, and him, Senator McCain, both peace and strength. I've already prayed for Senator McCain. I hope all of you will pray for Senator McCain, because there are things more important than politics, like simple, straightforward human decency. And I also wanted to read you a couple of statements, actually a tweet and a statement from two people in politics that have gone toe-to-toe with, and as it happens, respectively, defeated Senator McCain in presidential campaigns. The news that long-serving Arizona Senator John McCain has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer was a shock. And for those who are capable of putting politics aside, which is a rare skill these days, it was time to send well wishes and prayers. Now, as I said, I'm not a big fan of John McCain's politics, but I wouldn't wish this on him or anybody, nor would I wish the worry and heartache on his friends and loved ones. So we should all continue to pray for his recovery. Now, I won't even get into all the nastiness that I've already seen across social media. I saw it just this morning. It suffices to say, some of those who are wallowing in the sewer of their own depravity and lack of human empathy had better hope karma is not a real thing. So when Senator McCain went for surgery to have a blood clot removed from over his left eye last week, the cancerous tissue was discovered. The support being voiced for the 80-year-old senator has been encouraging and bipartisan. Huzzah. Former President Barack Obama tweeted out his encouragement on Wednesday evening after the news broke. Quote, John McCain is an American hero and one of the bravest fighters I've ever known. Cancer doesn't know what it's up against. Give it hell, John. Never let it be said that there was nothing on which Barack Obama and myself didn't agree. I'm right there with him on that one. And then here was today's statement from former President George W. Bush, and it was characteristically positive and uplifting. Quote, for immediate release, July 20th, 2017, statement by President George W. Bush on Senator John McCain from Crawford, Texas. Quote, I called Senator John McCain this morning to wish him well and encourage him in his fight. Instead, he encouraged me. I was impressed by his spirit and determination. He has devoted his life to his country. Thankfully, he is committed to continuing that service. Laura and I pray for our friend to fully recover and quickly return to the Senate, where his voice and leadership are needed. And we send our very best wishes to Cindy and the entire McCain family. Close quote. It's a wonderful word of encouragement. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how you bring civility back to our government. Remember that there are real people involved. And let's not also forget to lament the fact that it required a case of brain cancer to bring such civility back, even for a day. did you see the the near fist fight between Tucker Carlson and Max Boot last week on Fox News Channel? Jeez, that's, if you want to know why I don't watch cable news, that's why. Because cable, I don't care which channel it is. It could be Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. It really doesn't matter. It's like the Jerry Springer show. Like I say, we are drowning in a self-inflicted deluge of tabloid trash, ladies and gentlemen. That's what our politics is, the Jerry Springer show. On both sides of the aisle, that's what it is. And why do you think I'm the conservative Ronin? I mean, people might want to wonder, well, what is a Ronin? Because I've had Trumpers think that was somebody's name. And no, it's not a name. It's a word of Japanese derivation. You go see the Wolverine, and you'll find out what a Ronin is. But in short, a Ronin is a samurai without a master, which is analogous to being without a party. I'm an independent. I'm a conservative independent. The Republican Party left me, and so that made me a conservative Ronin. Conservative without a party, because both major parties are now of the left. And I can't go there. So, but because politics on both sides of the aisle is an ocean of tabloid trash, I don't watch cable news. So, but I heard about it, and then I watched a clip of it, and it's just two guys shouting at each other, and gee, that's really informative and interesting. Not. I think if they had been in the same studio face to face, they might have come to blows, because Tucker Carlson has just become the biggest Trump cuck you have ever seen in your life. It's pathetic. Absolutely pitiful. But Noah Rothman at Commentary Magazine believes that Tucker Carlson deserves a better answer. See, the topic was Trump and Russia and Syria, and now Trump is just has been a total lapdog has become a lapdog for Vladimir Putin, certainly on Syria and pretty much everything else. In fact, right before the show began, I found this tweet from the Reagan Battalion, and your source for news, information, and commentary from a conservative perspective. I'll have to do a Google search for that. I'm vicariously already in the Reagan Battalion, but we'll have to get hooked up with them. I'll have to do a Google search for that after the program today. But here's what they tweeted out this morning. In case you are not sure why some people suspect that Vladimir Putin is blackmailing Donald Trump, these are headlines just in the last 48 hours. We got 3 of them here. Trump had previously undisclosed second meeting with Putin in Hamburg last week. Trump to stop CIA arming rebels, anti-Assad rebels in Syria. And Sebastian Gorka, a Trump minion, Trump would return Russian compounds to give collaboration a chance. These were Russian compounds that were seized last year on Russian espionage grounds. Yeah, so in case you're not sure why some people suspect that Putin is blackmailing Trump, or at the very least that Trump is a Putin lapdog, well, there you go. But, like I say, Noah Rothman at commentarymagazine.com believes that Tucker Carlson deserves a better answer. I don't know why anybody who has become just a total dickwad, total douchebag for Trump deserves an answer on anything, but let's indulge him, shall we? Fox News Channel host Tucker Carlson asked a question 9 days ago that merits thorough examination and an honest response. The one he received from his interlocutor, retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, was entirely insufficient. How many wars can we fight at once? Asked Carlson with palpable weariness. Feigned weariness. He was acting. And technically, right now, we're not fighting any wars, thanks to Barack Obama, so I'm not even sure what he's talking about. The question arose during a discussion of Donald Trump's desire to sell out to the Russians, in effect. Though Carlson declined to mount a defense of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's character or behavior in office, maybe even he realized that he wasn't that good an actor, he wondered whether the United States wouldn't be better served by nevertheless partnering with bad people who have similar interests in Syria in particular. For asking this question, the premise of which is genuinely held by millions of really, really stupid Americans, Carlson was accused by Peters of sounding like the Nazi-sympathizing isolationists of the 1930s. Now, I don't know about the Nazi-sympathizing part, but isolationists of the 1930s, yeah, that's a pretty accurate description. Carlson bristled with indignation over the the deft and accurate attack on his character, and the conversation fell off a cliff. Carlson's premise is, however, worthy of a dispassionate and comprehensive response. Why does it contravene American interests to make common cause with a group that is trying to kill ISIS, the Fox host asked. Well, because ISIS is already dying and they're not a major American geopolitical adversary, whereas the Russians are. As Mitt Romney pointed out 5 years ago. Can you imagine how different things would be now if Mitt Romney had won the 2012 election? Might have saved the Republican Party. The answer to Carlson's question is simple. It does not. The problem is that Carlson's is not an accurate description of Russia's behavior in Syria. In September 2015, as the Bashar al-Assad regime teetered, and with army reserves depleting rapidly, Russia intervened militarily on its vassals' behalf. In other words, the Russians invaded Syria. In effect, Moscow claimed it was unilaterally joining the global coalition to combat ISIS, but its interest was only in saving Assad and, by extension, Russia's last port on the Mediterranean at Tartus. Remember the Apostle Paul's hometown? It was Tarsus back then. Now it's called Tartus, not Tardis. We're not talking Doctor Who here. Let's trying to keep everything straight. Moscow focused not on striking ISIS targets, but on anti-regime rebels trained by the CIA. Russia even struck CIA-provided weapons depots in Syria, revealing to the world for the first time the extent of the U.S. government's covert efforts to unseat the genocidal weapons of mass destruction using dictator in Damascus, as well as Iranian stooge. Russian attacks on the bases where U.S. and British special forces train indigenous soldiers continued well into last year. As recently as March, Russian jets bombed a town in which coalition forces were operating, and just a few kilometers away from where U.S. special forces were stationed. In other words, acts of war against the United States. Now, Russia's conduct in Syria has been deplorable. Their every effort has been expended to actively preserve the integrity of a regime that is alleged to have deployed chemical weapons on civilians, that executes women and children en masse, uses rape as a weapon of war, and organizes starvation campaigns targeting whole cities, and is an avowed enemy of the United States of America. The United States has confirmed that its intelligence indicates Russia was aware of Syria's preparations to deploy nerve agents on civilian targets back in April. Remember the Trumpahawk cruise missile attack on that Syrian airfield, for which I complimented and fully supported Trump when he ordered that. Following that attack, a Russian-made warplane bombed the hospital in which gas victims were receiving treatment, an operation the United States believes was designed to cover up the massacre. Russia is credibly alleged to have used cluster bombs, incendiary munitions, and white phosphorus in violation of international law. Russia rarely executes any strikes on ISIS targets, and why should they? The regime they are defending has little interest in neutralizing the ISIS threat. Oil and gas sales to Assad's regime are now the Islamic State's largest source of funds, the Wall Street Journal reported in January. And this follows a pattern. Assad looked the other way when Islamist terror groups began coalescing into the organization that became ISIS, because Assad assumed such groups would shock and scare the West out of intervening in the conflict. And he was correct. Both Moscow and Damascus continue to view ISIS as a useful entity that allows them to frame the conflict as one between the forces of civilization and savagery. As the ISIS caliphate implodes, the regime has taken to mounting a kinetic defense of the Islamist terror network strongholds. In June, a U.S. Navy fighter shot down a Syrian warplane when that bomber executed airstrikes on U.S.-backed forces laying siege to the suburbs of ISIS's de facto capital of Raqqa in northeastern Syria. Russia responded to that attack on their ally not with apologies for interfering in the campaign against terrorists they claim to support, the campaign that is, but by threatening to target any NATO assets that cross the west bank of the Euphrates River. These conflicting interests are intractable, ladies and gentlemen. They are why a series of jointly negotiated ceasefires have failed, and why the limited cessation of hostilities in Syria's south, agreed to by Russian and American officials at the G20 summit last week, or week before last, is doomed to follow a similar course. Iran and its proxies, another set of disreputable Russian allies, are mounting an increasingly aggressive campaign against U.S. forces near Syria's border with Jordan and Iraq. The ceasefire was broken just last week by regime-aligned forces and Iranian-backed rebels. To cooperate with Russia in any effort to impose peace in Syria on Russian terms, such as jointly monitored safe zones, is to be complicit in the Assad regime's crimes. As long as the Assad regime is in power, there will be a Sunni-dominated insurgency against his regime. To ally with Russia in Syria is to align with rogues like Assad, Hezbollah, and the Islamist radicals they claim to oppose. That would create a schism between the United States and the Sunni actors, both sovereign and non-state, relationships that are already strained as a result of the Obama administration's overtures toward Iran. Those are unacceptable moral and strategic compromises that are not justified by any rational strategic consideration. The kind of cooperative relationship the United States and Russia can navigate is the one in which they are presently involved. the kind typified by mechanisms designed to keep one another apart and to de-escalate conflicts should they arise. That means post-ISIS Syria will be characterized by some kind of soft partition. This is hardly an optimal outcome, but more palatable alternatives have been precluded by 7 years of war. To millions of Americans, Syria is a charnel house best left alone. Those Americans are wrong. The fact, I mean, maybe 4 years ago, that was my stance 4 years ago. Remember Barack Obama's Operation Don't Mock Me? You know, when his red lines bluff was called by Assad, and then he punted the whole thing to Putin, which is how Putin wound up in Syria in the first place. And I said that we should either glass the whole place, get rid of Assad, get rid of ISIS, get rid of Al-Qaeda, get rid of everybody, or leave, or just stay out, because we have no horse in that race, we have no dog in that fight. But that was then. This is now. And now, staying out of Syria would be wrong. The fact is that the sorry state of affairs in the Levant is largely a result of America's efforts to extricate itself from the region under Barack Obama. The notion that the United States should or even can partner with Russia in Syria now is a dangerous fantasy. The president is better served when those who wish his presidency to succeed decline to reinforce his stupid-ass preconceptions, his Nazi-sympathizing isolationism of the 1930s, particularly those founded in rank ignorance. But then, is there anything about Donald Trump that isn't characterized by rank ignorance? So let's take a step back for a moment and ask the question, what did happen in Hamburg 2 weeks ago? In that 2 hour and 16-minute meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, where Trump was not allowed to have any of his advisors present. Oh, man. Just think about that. I mean, if you were Donald Trump and you had any sense of, any real sense of how in over your head you really were, and you wanted to have a meeting with Putin at the G20, but the only conditions under which Putin would allow such a one-on-one meeting is if you weren't allowed to bring any of your advisors. I'd be feeling like, oh boy, I'm really in over. Maybe I better just skip this. This does not sound like a good idea. Or you alternatively, you could have reacted indignantly, as in, well, what do you mean I don't get to have any of my advisors present? Who the hell are you? Who do you think you are? Referring to Putin. But that's not what Trump did, because Trump's an idiot. Trump is a narcissist. Trump, he thinks he knows everything and he's always right, and it just never even occurs to him that maybe he's about to get his ass handed to him. I mean, not physically, but certainly in a strategic sense, because that appears to be what happened in Hamburg 2 weeks ago. In fact, Eric Edelman at the Weekly Standard calls it the worst U.S.-Russia summit since Kennedy got his ass handed to him by Nikita Khrushchev in 1961. And if you will will recall that led barely more than a year later to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The president-elect's narrow victory at the end of a volatile campaign quickly led to efforts at planning a meeting of the American and Russian leaders. Relations between the two countries had deteriorated badly, not to say spectacularly, in the last year of the previous administration, amidst mutual recriminations about spying. Russia's activist ambassador began assiduously working his contacts in the president-elect's entourage to assess the new team's attitude and prospects for improved relations. Heedless of experts counseling caution, the impetuous new chief executive plunged ahead with plans to meet his more experienced and wily counterpart, driven by the conviction that he could improve a relationship damaged by his blundering predecessor. The year was 1961, and John F. Kennedy's summit meeting with Soviet dictator Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna that June is generally considered to have been a disaster. Owing to insufficient diplomatic preparation, there was no set agenda for the meeting, which was billed as an opportunity to get acquainted. Khrushchev concluded that the inexperienced new president was weak and unlikely to respond forcefully to Soviet actions. Within the ensuing year, he would trigger two crises that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. He was emboldened to step up the pressure on Berlin. The wall started going up the very next month in 1961 in August. And the summit almost certainly encouraged Khrushchev to believe that he could deploy nuclear weapons to Cuba surreptitiously. I mean, sneakily, covertly, for those of you in Murrieta, California. And that confronted by a fait accompli, Kennedy was likely to back down. It was arguably the most dangerous moment in the Cold War. In the words of Secretary of State Dean Rusk, the two nuclear superpowers were eyeball to eyeball, with the very real prospect of a devastating nuclear exchange. This history was, of course, brought to mind by the performance of Donald Trump in his first meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. The eerie parallels speak for themselves. As Karl Marx famously wrote in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, second as farce. But there is an important difference. Kennedy, JFK, had the wit to realize that Khrushchev had gotten the better of the exchange. He told the New York Times' James Reston on Background that it was, quote, the worst thing in my life. He savaged me, close quote. President Trump and his acolytes, on the other hand, appear to believe that the July 7th meeting of the two leaders in Hamburg went very well indeed. According to Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, a.k.a. the obtuse oaf, according to his briefing to the press, quote, the meeting was very constructive. The two leaders, I would say, connected very quickly. There was a very clear positive chemistry between the two. It'd be X-rated, at least figuratively speaking. More realistically, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, hardly a bastion of hostility to Trump, soberly noted that, quote, we'll find out in the coming weeks how Vladimir Putin sized up Donald Trump in their first mano-a-mano meeting on Friday. But one bad sign is the Trump team's post-meeting resort to Obama-like rhetoric of cooperation and shared U.S.-Russia purposes. Close quote. So here is why the meeting not only was not a success, but was likely a disaster for U.S.-Russia relations and global order. The absence of an agenda on the U.S. side, as National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster admitted before the event, guaranteed that Putin, who most assuredly always has an agenda, would dominate and drive the conversation. Moreover, a limit on the number of participants, as aforementioned, left Trump without the services of McMaster and his senior director for Russia, the very impressive Fiona Hill. The U.S. side is now dependent on the interpreter's notes for a record of the discussion, not having had a Russian speaker who knows Putin well in the meeting. God, it just gets worse with each paragraph, with each ensuing paragraph, ladies and gentlemen. Someone who might have picked up important nuances in the conversation. Why did Trump agree to this? I'll tell you why he agreed to this, because he didn't care about these things. He didn't think they were important. In other words, Donald Trump's an idiot. The Russian agenda for the meeting was clear. To, 1, deflect the issue of hacking and interference in the U.S. election. 2, preserve Russia's position as the arbiter of Syria's future, including after the liberation of Raqqa from ISIS. And 3, set the stage for the removal of post-Crimea sanctions and normalization of the situation in Ukraine in anticipation that the government in Kiev will ultimately collapse and Russia will be able to pick up the pieces, i.e. annex or re-annex the Ukraine. And Trump's lack of preparation appears to have advanced Russia's agenda in each of these areas. And he doesn't even realize it. This is why you don't elect neophytes and amateurs and, dare I say it, non-politicians. On the election interference issue, Tillerson said that the president pressed Putin. Yeah, sure he did. The Russians say that Trump accepted Putin's denials that Moscow had improperly interfered in the election campaign and agreed to move on. Well, I'm not going to say whom I believe more, but the Russian version does sound a lot more plausible. Tillerson asserted that Trump and Putin, quote, had a very robust and lengthy exchange on the subject, and that the president pressed Putin on more than one occasion regarding Russian involvement. Close quote. Trump's own subsequent tweeting saying that he had already given my opinion, a reference to his press conference statement the previous day that no one really knows who did it, suggests that the Russian account is closer to the truth. Moreover, Tillerson is reported to have told associates privately that he was stunned that the president opened the discussion by saying, "I'm going to get this out of the way." So in other words, Trump really didn't care about pressing Russia on their election interference last year. It was a pro forma thing so that he could say, yes, I brought it up with Putin. And basically, in essence, most likely, Trump says something like this: I'm going to get this out of the way. Did you interfere in the election? And then Putin said, oh, no, he did not interfere in the election at all, Mr. President. Okay, let's move on. That was probably the extent of it, ladies and gentlemen. In effect, signaling his lack of seriousness about the issue. On Syria, Trump and Putin reached a deconfliction agreement for the area in southern Syria along the Jordanian border. As the Lawfare blog noted, quote, the agreement is notable and here it is. The agreement is notable in that it protects some of the rebels' embattled territory, preserving their role in negotiating the future of Syria. That is a significant win for the United States despite Washington's limited leverage in the Syrian civil war. But Russia probably gets the better end of the bargain. The agreement builds on the Astana framework negotiated by Russia, will rely on Russian forces to monitor and enforce the ceasefire, and follows the U.S. government's decision to drop its stated policy calling for the removal of Bashar al-Assad. Close quote. More troubling still was Tillerson's assertion that Russia has the same, or quote, Russia has the same, I think, interest that we do in having Syria become a stable place, a unified place, but ultimately a place where we can facilitate a political discussion about their future, including the future leadership of Syria. Close quote. It was this statement that some labeled as Kerry speak, as in Tillerson's predecessor at Foggy Bottom, John Kerry. Now, anyone who has followed the developments in Syria since 2011 and who thinks the United States and Russia share the same interests there is simply delusional. Putin sees the rebellion in Syria as a U.S.-sponsored color revolution, whose ultimate objective is Assad's removal. Russia's professions of concern about ISIS belie its record of bombing and killing the very moderate forces the U.S. government has been training. Moscow's aim being to present Washington with a binary choice between ISIS and accepting the continuation of the murderous Assad regime. This does not even begin to touch on Russian war crimes and support for Assad's use of chemical weapons. On Ukraine, Trump tweeted that sanctions on Russia had not been discussed at the meeting, but it is not clear what to make of the appointment of former NATO ambassador Kurt Volker, a formidable diplomat with no illusions about Russia, as U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine. Under normal circumstances, Volker's selection would be welcomed by critics of U.S. passivity in the face of Russia's destabilization of eastern Ukraine. The signal sent by his announcement, however, was vitiated by Tillerson's explanation that the envoy position was created at the request of Vladimir Putin. The danger here is that Putin is creating a special channel to lay the groundwork for normalization and U.S. concessions in return for worthless Russian promises. Yeah, that definitely sounds Obama-esque. Now, what did the Russian side likely take away from this first meeting between the two leaders? Well, it appears that they have taken Trump's measure and see him as someone whom they can manipulate by flattery. How long have I been saying that, ladies and gentlemen? All you have to do is say nice things about Trump, and he will curl up in your lap like a Cocker Spaniel, whose lack of preparation enables him to drive the agenda, doesn't do his homework, comprehensively lazy, thinks he already knows everything, doesn't know what he doesn't know, and who is unwilling to exact costs on them for the extraordinary act of interfering in U.S. elections when that interference just happened to work in Trump's favor. Now, already Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is talking about expelling up to 30 U.S. diplomats and perhaps appropriating U.S. properties in Moscow in retaliation for the expulsion of Russian personnel and seizure of Russian diplomatic recreational facilities by the Obama administration at the end of 2016. Remember that headline that the Reagan Battalion tweeted out earlier? Trump would return Russian compounds to give collaboration a chance. Hey, it's just that's the latest headline. This is likely only the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. Putin decided that Obama was someone whose greater flexibility in the second term he could use to his own advantage. Hamburg no doubt taught him he is not facing a more determined adversary, but rather that he is getting more of the same. Well, I don't know what else to tell you except that I'm pretty confident, in fact, I'm very confident that a President Romney or a President Rubio or a President Cruz or a President, any of the Republican candidates last year would not have, well, first of all, they wouldn't have taken that meeting under those circumstances. And second of all, the meeting, if they had taken it, would have turned out very differently. We'll be back.
Today, there's a beer for everyone.
Hey, me and the guys are going out for a beer. You want to come along?
Nah, I got a lot of data to enter into the computer tonight.
Now, there's a brew for the future.
Want me to bring you something back?
Thanks, but I got some right here.
Microsoft Brew.
You got a beer tap on your computer?
With a head so thick you can float a mouse on it.
Let me get this straight. You make your own beer with the computer?
With the right software, you can do anything.
Microsoft Brew.
Here, I call this one Windows 95.
I don't know. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
And if you got to get there quicker, try the new ISDN malt liquor.
Are you a psychopathic wacko? Are you uncomfortable in your current surroundings? Are you looking for a new place to hole up and hide out? Come to beautiful Montana, the last best place, and the last place anyone would ever look for you. Montana has a long heritage of being a place to hide. From Charles Manson's summer home on Flathead Lake, Ted Bundy's Buffalo Ranch, even Jimmy Hoffa buried in the floor of the Metro Park Arena. Miles and miles of beautiful countryside with neighbors that will leave you alone to mail your bombs and print your bad checks. Unless you tick them off, then they'll form a posse and take care of you themselves. So if you're the nutcase leader of a fringe extremist, racist, uneducated, inbred, child-abusing, wife-beating, couldn't follow a law if you wrote it yourself, ostracized by family and friends because you're a loony, like to wear a camisole and pumps with your camouflage, your last girlfriend ate from a trough and slept in a barn, fraudulent waste of oxygen hate group, then come on in to Montana. But be warned, we'll find you soon.
July is National Baked Bean Month. Excuse me. Yes, a month in which we pay tribute to one of America's favorite, most healthful, and nutritious foods. I'm terribly sorry. As I was saying, good Lord, this is terribly embarrassing. I'm so... Whoa, doggy! I guess I'd better wrap this up quick. Basically, Jesus, whoa! Oh, God! My God!
Baked beans. They're nature's way of saying, for God's sake, open a window. Sorry.
Welcome. How can I help you?
In the application process, I'm at Setup 7 of Family and Household. Clicking Save and Continue does not allow me to move forward.
Don't lose your sanity over this website. Try it. If it doesn't work, walk away. Try it tomorrow.
What you sent me seems like a canned response.
It was.
I had the login problems for the first 11 days.
Imagine you are stuck in the site's rush hour traffic. You still exist, you just aren't going anywhere.
You have no way to assist those that ask for help?
Don't run with scissors.
Why is there even a chat option on the page if you can't look up an application and assist?
You can contact the Health Insurance Marketplace call center. They may be able to assist you.
Then what is the chat function for?
Your chat session is over for contacting us, and we hope we've answered your questions. Have a great day.
Spring has sprung, the birds are chirping, the flowers are blooming, and we're partying. It's the first annual Pagan Ritual Pig Out, this station's way of ushering in the season, the vernal equinox, a time when pagans conducted dark rituals and blood sacrifices, and that's just what we'll be doing. Join us in the Circle of Rocks deep in the woods, just west of town, as we celebrate spring the way they used to. We'll start at sundown by sacrificing a couple of lambs. Then we'll string up some virgins by their heels, slit their throats, and chug-a-lug their blood. We'll be playing flutes and prancing naked in the moonlight all night long. And one lucky winner will get to have sex with a goat. We'll also have pagan drink specials, munchies, and pitchers of beer for just $1. The Pagan Ritual Pig Out this Friday night from the station that parties naked in the woods with animals.
more tweets here, looking at over the top of the hour break. Here's another one for the Reagan Battalion. Just a day after Trump announced that the CIA program to assist moderate anti-Assad rebels will be suspended comes this headline. Reports of Assad forces deploying toxic gas after failing to advance in the East Ghouta area. So Assad is using chemical weapons again. Not even 24 hours after Trump, in essence, ran up the white flag in classic Barack Obama fashion. Evan McMullen tweeted, Trump rails against imaginary Mueller conflicts of interest, the Russiagate special prosecutor, while dismissing Jeff Sessions, Trump's attorney general, actual conflicts of interest on Russia. Remember how Trump criticized, or maybe I did. That came out this morning. Yeah, I stand corrected. Trump slammed his own attorney general for having recused himself without permission on Russiagate. There is a conflict of interest, but again, Trump doesn't care about conflicts of interest as long as they work in his favor. It's only when they work against him that he has a problem with them. And then John Schindler tweeted out this morning. Trump does really stupid things daily, but threatening Bob Mueller not to investigate him takes the all-time prize for Don Dumbassery. Oh, here's another one from Noah Rothman. Any thought of firing... This was a quote from a GOP senator. Any thought of firing the special counsel is chilling. It's chilling. That's all you can say. This is from an article headline, GOP senators dismayed at Trump's criticism of DOJ officials. Although, like I've said, I have no sympathy for the Republican Party leadership. I have no sympathy for them at all. They knew. They had to have known this is what they were going to get by nominating Donald Trump. They had to have known that. And, now they're reaping the whirlwind, and, they may look like William Wyndham as Commodore Matthew Decker when he flew that shuttlecraft right into the planet killer in the Star Trek, the original series episode, The Doomsday Machine, where he just like, ah! Yeah. They brought it on themselves. They could have prevented all of this. They could have just said, Donald Trump is not going to be our presidential nominee, period. Yeah, well, it might have cost them the election, but it would have saved their party in the long run. Because I can't imagine anybody other than perhaps Barack Obama who would have quietly given Vladimir Putin everything he wanted in Hamburg 2 weeks ago. That's what Noah Rothman concurs with me on that at Commentary Magazine. Now, until now, the notion that Donald Trump was providing Russia and Vladimir Putin with concessions at the expense of U.S. interests was poorly supported. But that all changed yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, as a matter of fact, when the Washington Post revealed that Donald Trump ordered his national security advisor and CIA director to scrap a program that provided covert aid to anti-Assad rebels in Syria. The president made that decision on July 7th, within 24 hours of his first face-to-face meeting with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Quid pro quo, anybody? The sources who spoke to the Washington Post accurately characterized it as a reflection of Trump's interest in finding ways to work with Russia. Just like Barack Obama. It's like Obama never left. That is a fool's errand, but more important, this move demonstrates that the United States is willing to cede ground to enemies and bad actors as long as they are persistent enough. Which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Kind of intriguing. Because Trump is supposed to be the negotiator in chief. He's the master deal maker. But the first rule of negotiation, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, first rule of negotiation is that the side that can afford to walk away from the table first is the one that usually has the upper hand. And yet here's the negotiator in chief just getting, losing his shirt, just getting stripped stark naked, hopefully just figuratively speaking, by Vladimir Putin. Wily indeed. Now, we endeavored to demonstrate as thoroughly as we could in the first hour why American interests in Syria and those of Russia not only do not align, but often conflict violently. The president appears convinced, like his predecessor, that his personal political interests are better served by allowing Moscow to be the power broker in Syria, even if that makes America and its allies less safe. Tell me again how this squares up with America First nationalism. This sounds more like Russia First, doesn't it? Moscow has made it a priority to execute airstrikes on American and British covert facilities in Syria, and Donald Trump has just rewarded those airstrikes on U.S. targets. Trump has sacrificed the goodwill he garnered from Sunni-dominated Middle Eastern governments when he executed strikes on Assad's assets, and as recently as June, the U.S. downed a Syrian warplane for attacking anti-ISIS rebels laying siege to the Islamic State capital of Raqqa. America will continue to provide support to indigenous anti-ISIS rebels despite the fact that those forces are often under assault from both Russian and Syrian forces. It should be noted, however, that the CIA suspended aid to Free Syrian Army elements when it came under attack from Islamists in February. The agency said it did not want cash and weapons falling into Islamist hands, but this move exposes that claim as a mere pretext. This concession to Russia is significant, not just because it removes some pressure on Moscow's vassal in Damascus. It sends a series of signals to the world's bad actors, America's enemies, who will inevitably react. The phasing out of aid for anti-Assad rebels, presumably the indigenous Sunni-dominated factions, gives Russia and Syria the only thing they have ever wanted: the ability to frame the conflict in Syria as one between the regime and a handful of radicals and pariahs. A cessation of aid will squeeze the remaining moderate secular rebel factions in Syria and compel them to seek whatever assistance they can, even at the risk of augmenting the ranks of Islamist insurgents, jihadists, in other words. How that advances America's interests is entirely unclear, which is another way of saying it doesn't. But it does advance Russian interests. Again, how is this America First nationalism? I don't see it. This move will only further embolden not just Russia and Syria, but their mutual ally and our avowed arch enemy, the Islamic Empire of Iran. It will convince the region's Sunni actors that the United States is not on their side, a matter of increasing urgency in Iraq. The insurgency in Syria is unlikely to end so long as regional fighters have a means of getting into the country. America will simply sacrifice its leverage over those groups for nothing. Negotiator in chief, my ass. This move will confirm, finally, that the use of weapons of mass destruction on the battlefield is survivable. A truly resolute American administration might fire off another handful of Tomahawk missiles at an abandoned airfield, but regime change is not in the offing. That will only beget other bad actors who will test the parameters of America's willingness to defend the international norms prohibiting the use of weapons of mass destruction. Think of that in the context of North Korea, ladies and gentlemen. Or the Chi-Coms on the shipping lanes through, I forget what that's, but the shipping lanes going up from Indonesia toward Japan and Korea. Because American servicemen and women are stationed around the world at unstable theaters, the likelihood that they will one day be fighting on chemical battlefields, at minimum, just became a lot more likely. American covert involvement in Syria also filled a vacuum that the Obama administration allowed to expand in 2011 and 2012. One big potential risk of shutting down the CIA program is that the United States may lose its ability to block other countries, such as Turkey and Persian Gulf allies, from funneling more sophisticated weapons, including man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, to anti-Assad rebels, including more radical groups, the Washington Post speculated. Ironically, American withdrawal from the anti-Assad effort could actually fuel the fire, but in a way that we can neither control nor effectively influence. Gee, we've seen that movie before. I think it starred Barack Obama. And we know how that movie ends, don't we? And all of this for what? To garner goodwill with the bloody regime in Damascus, whom we've already tomahawked? To court Moscow or Tehran? Yeah, how'd that work out for Barack Obama? I mean, there is nothing to gain from cozying up to these regimes that is not more than offset by the sacrifice of American national interests and moral authority associated with rapprochement, which is a euphemism for appeasement, collaboration, sellout. For all of the Trump administration's criticisms of Barack Obama's policy with regard to those regimes, this decision suggests that the Donald is willing, more than willing, even eager to double down on Barack Hussein Obama's mistakes. Battalion tweet. Trump said Mueller's team would cross a red line if they delve into Trump family finances unrelated to Russia. Begging the question, of what is Trump afraid? I mean, it's not an unreasonable question. You can say all you want about a runaway special prosecutor, run amok. Yeah, fine and dandy. But, it just begs, Trump is not wily, shall we say. Trump is not subtle. Trump is WYSIWYG. He's a prolific, promiscuous liar, but he's a transparent liar. You can always tell when he's lying. Usually it's that his lips are moving. And so when Donald Trump, I'll tell you what that is. That's ego more than anything else. It's part of his whole witch hunt motif. And all of this stuff he brought on himself, folks. He brought it on himself. He brought Robert Mueller on himself by firing James Comey. He brought James Comey on himself by not showing Comey the door back in January. All of this Russiagate stuff is self-inflicted on Donald Trump. He's his own worst enemy. I don't know how long I'm going to have to keep saying that, I and other conservative rodents, before Trumpers finally start paying attention. But Noah Rothman, and this goes back to last week as well, believes that, and lots of luck with this one, that believes that Congress must restore trust in Trump's Russia policy by pretty much by reversing it. That's the only thing that would restore confidence in it in my book. And boy, is this ever true. Trumplicans are in denial. The GOP's response to the bombshell revelations regarding the Trump campaign's inclination to indulge an offer of assistance from a Kremlin intermediary has been a muddled one. Depending on which Trumplican you ask, this is either a moment to pound the table over Barack Obama's failed attempt at a reset with Russia, in other words, whataboutism, or to request patience as the sluggish investigations into the Trump campaign trudge along, which would be more realistic if Trump would ever shut up about Russia. Conservative and liberal columnists alike are likely to start that again. Conservative and liberal columnists are likely to note that voters in Trump country don't care about the investigation into Russian meddling in 2016 because, of course, it worked in their favor. And without that, Trumplicans in Congress won't either. But these responses miss the point. What is alleged and what Donald Trump Jr. has not denied is a serious breach of the public trust. I mean, just think about it, Trumplicans. If you substitute the name Hillary Clinton and say Chelsea Clinton for Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr., how would Trumplicans have reacted if this had been Chelsea Clinton taking this meeting with Kremlin intermediaries who had dirt on Donald Trump and was willing to help Hillary Clinton? How would they have reacted to that? It is incumbent upon Congress to abandon its sheepishness and act forcefully to restore that public, or rather to install that public trust, since there never has been that trust. That trust has never existed. Now, first, let's dispense with the permissive idea that rank-and-file Trumplicans are just fine with the allegations regarding the Trump campaign's misconduct vis-a-vis the Russians. As a CBS News survey released in late June demonstrated, a plurality of self-described Trumplican respondents said they believed Robert Mueller's investigation into the Trump campaign would be impartial. Moreover, 75% of Trumplicans said Trump shouldn't try to stop Mueller's probe, and a full 40% of self-identified GOP voters think it is likely Trump associates had improper conduct or contact with Russian government officials, a 15% increase from March. Those Trumplicans joined 65%, almost two-thirds of the broader public. When it comes to bilateral relations with Russia, Trumplicans in Congress have a mandate to reassert their role in the conduct of American foreign policy. Even if voters had faith in the Trump White House's ability to manage American interests with regard to Russia, it would be incumbent upon Congress to act. Fortunately, they have an avenue through which to achieve this pressing objective, a bipartisan bill, which passed the Senate by an astounding 98-2 that imposes new sanctions on Moscow and Tehran. Now, for lazy or cynical commentators quick to assert that the GOP-led Congress is unfailingly deferential to the Trump White House, that sanctions bill is a narrative killer. It provides Congress with the sole authority to review any efforts by the administration to implement those sanctions in the manner of its choosing. The Trump administration has reportedly fought to have this provision stripped from the bill. Lapdog, ladies and gentlemen. It is perhaps excusable that the executive branch would seek to protect its authority from an assault by a superior branch. Congress comes first, then the presidency, and then the Supreme Court. It's equally understandable that diplomatic officials like Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, a.k.a. the obtuse oaf, would object to having their hands tied by Congress. But these objections are also, however, mooted by the revelations regarding Donald Trump Jr.'s conduct. The extraordinary nature of Donald Trump's conciliatory rhetoric, conciliatory, about collaborative, even subversive rhetoric towards Russia, and his refusal to respond directly to the Russian-led assault on American sovereignty in 2016, again, how does that line up with America First nationalism, have forced Congress's hand. There is no more room for the benefit of the doubt. So sick of hearing that phrase used in the context of Donald Trump. There are other legitimate objections to the sanctions bill, namely a boomerang provision in the legislation that would bar U.S. oil exploration firms from participating in a project where Russian firms also had access rights. And that provision would cost American businesses millions and, ironically, make it easier for Russian energy exploration firms to do business. Amending this provision and clearing the way for passage through the House should not be difficult. It took just days to resolve a procedural hiccup in the bill, in which House members objected to a revenue-related provision originating in the Senate, a violation of the Constitution's origination clause. And yet, the bill has been stalled in the House for weeks. That inexcusable logjam must be cleared. If Tuesday's headlines won't do it, nothing will. Economic sanctions aren't the only area in which the U.S. Congress is obliged to hold the Trump administration's feet to the fire. Whether they like it or not, the Trump administration has been bequeathed an on-the-ground conflict in Syria, and they are prosecuting it. Poorly. More often than anyone should be comfortable with, that conflict involves direct hostilities with the Syrian armed forces. The legislature should codify the emerging Trump doctrine into a new authorization to use military force against all forces loyal to Damascus. Such an authorization can be broad in scope so as not to put legal obstacles before the president, but it must recognize and sanction the fact that American soldiers are conducting combat operations in Syria against Syrians. This, too, would contain and constrict Russia. Now, last week, following a glowing display of, or week before last, a fortnight ago, following a glowing display of chumminess between the Russian dictator and his American lapdog counterpart, the obtuse oaf announced a new cooperative initiative between Moscow and the U.S. in Syria, saying that our mutual objectives are exactly the same. This is laughably naive. American objectives, the stabilization of Syria and the transition away from the Assad regime, are viewed by the Kremlin as serious threats. So serious, in fact, that when the Assad regime was threatened in 2015, and with him the Russian Mediterranean port in Syria, Moscow responded by striking CIA-provided weapons and U.S.-backed anti-Assad forces. Russia is guilty of committing humanitarian atrocities in Syria, and the appearance of American military cooperation with Moscow in jointly monitored safe zones would render Washington complicit in, or which is to say, it would render Trump complicit in those crimes. Tillerson and Trump appear eager to outsource the work of achieving a suitable peace in Syria to Russia, just like John Kerry and Barack Obama did before them. This is official resignation to unacceptable outcomes. Congress should not allow that to happen without a fight. Now, none of this is to say that diplomacy or cooperation with Moscow in Europe or the Middle East is not possible. Indeed, cooperation between those two great powers, well, let's just say I don't have any more confidence. I don't have any confidence in cooperating with the Russians anywhere, because the same principles are and the same leaders are involved, which is the same thing that I maintained throughout the 8 years of Barack Obama. But the founders envisioned a role for Congress when it came to executing American foreign policy objectives. Posterity will be unforgiving should they fail at that charge. Sunday at theresurgent.com. You know what? It is ultimately irrelevant that either the Democrats set up Donald Trump Jr. or the Russians set up both the Democrats and the Trump campaign. Whether there was a setup or not, the only reason we are in this situation is because Donald Trump Jr. chose to take that meeting, chose to lie about that meeting, chose to feign full transparency and disclosure about that meeting, and is still hiding stuff about that meeting. If the meeting was perfectly innocent, why hide so much that it perpetuates a media cycle? If nothing came of the meeting, why not get it all out there now? Who all was in the meeting? We should all know this by now, instead of seeing the media drip, drip, drip out that first there was a Russian lawyer whom the Trump team said was not there. Then it turns out there was a former Soviet spy in the meeting too. Kushner allegedly left the meeting pretty quickly, but the others stayed, and there were more in the meeting than we know about. It's the latest count is 8 people in the meeting. If the Trump team truly has nothing to hide, they ought to get it all out there quickly, forcefully, and make the case that they should move on. The problem is, at this point, no one can really trust them, and you can tell no one trusts them because even their own chief defenders are divided on how best to defend them and what talking points work best. It seems they have hired outside expert damage control advisors and have refused to listen to them at all, given the array of defenses and decisions being made. And on top of it all, it is more and more obvious that most of the leaking is coming from within the Trump team. In fact, one person in the White House tells Eric Erickson that he is even convinced that it is his colleagues leaking and not the Mueller team. Two senators familiar with the Mueller investigation also tell Erickson that the leaks are Trump team originated, and not with Mueller's team in their opinion. In fact, one person with direct knowledge of the investigation tells Erickson that Mueller's team is looking at something the media speculation is not currently covering, and has only shifted its attention to Trump Jr. after the release of that email thread. But even this guy will not say what the team is actually looking at. Or even this guy will not say at what the team is actually looking. And I should note that it was Jared Kushner's legal team that threw the Donald Jr. email out there. The people in the Trump team, as a White House friend said to Erickson, are engaged in, quote, amateur Game of Thrones bullshit, close quote, and have largely succeeded in sabotaging the rest of this year for President Trump. Which is really saying something, given that Trump keeps working tirelessly at sabotaging himself every single day. Now, it should be abundantly obvious to everyone at this point that the Russians knew stupid when they saw it, and knew just how easy it would be to toy with Team Trump for their own ends. Sadly, that should be the wake-up call to the president that he needs to start listening to advice from qualified people, but he seems intent to keep it all in the very same stupid family that is sinking his stupid ship of state. It's just so stupid. State, Sunday. Headline, Trump's lawyer places blame for Russia meeting on Secret Service. But not so fast, the Secret Service replies. I mean, this is just, you talk about stupid. So one of Donald Trump's outside lawyers, the execrable Jay Sekulow, hit the Sunday morning shows to run defense against the heat generated last week over news of Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer, presumably to receive dirt on Hillary Clinton straight from the Russian government. Sekulow, in his defense, tried to lay the bulk of blame on the backs of the U.S. Secret Service. Said Sekulow, quote from thehill.com, "If this was nefarious, why'd the Secret Service allow these people in?" Sekulow asked on ABC's This Week. "The president had Secret Service protection at that point," he said. "That raised a question with me." End of quote. At some point, you have to wonder if those writing the Trump train are instructed to just abandon all reason. Everyone has seen the emails by now. It didn't seem as if the younger Trump was giving a lot of thought to the Secret Service. Once Sekulow's comments had circulated, the punchline is coming here, folks. Once Sekulow's comments had circulated, raising the question as to if this was a Secret Service slip-up, however, the Secret Service responded, quote, Donald Trump Jr. was not a protectee of the United States Secret Service in June of 2016. Thus, we would not have screened anyone with whom he was meeting at that time. Secret Service spokesman Mason Brayman said in a statement to Reuters on Sunday, which makes perfect sense because at that point, Trump had only become presumptive nominee about a week or two earlier, and thus, plus, family is not given Secret Service protection at least until the candidate becomes his or her party's official nominee. So no, Donald Trump Jr. would not have had Secret Service protection by that time, by definition. Well, doesn't Jay Sekulow look dopey? Good Lord. The Secret Service gives protection to presidential and vice presidential candidates official once they're nominated, which wasn't, in this case, until the following month. So the Secret Service gives protection to presidential and vice presidential candidates and their nominees and their spouses for around 120 days before general election. Once Trump was president-elect, meaning after the election, okay, so it's even further off. Once Trump was president-elect, meaning that after the election, his kids fell, only then did his kids fall under the umbrella of protection by the Secret Service. So in June 2016, Donald Trump Jr. was 5 months away from having Secret Service protection, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting at Trump Tower, attended by Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, the Russian lawyer, and the FSB entourage, happened several days after Trump was deemed the winner of the primaries. Sekulow did Trump no favors with this idiocy. This situation is getting more complicated for Trump by the day. It seems very much like the Trump train is just throwing things at the wall to see what might stick. Democrat plot conspiracy theory about the Trump Jr. meeting, his collusive meeting with the Russians, is so dumb it's hilarious, opines Jay Caruso at Red State, also on Sunday. It's hard to fathom how reasonably intelligent people fall into the trap of believing the most ridiculous of stories. Dr. Theodore Woodward came up with the aphorism, "When you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras." It was a warning to medical students who want to believe the common cold is an exotic disease. Law enforcement uses the phrase as well. The solution to a crime is usually the simplest explanation, not a twisted web of events. Occam's razor, in other words. Now, the meeting Donald Trump Jr. put together in June 2016 with a Russian lawyer stinks to high heaven. The straw man argument that it's no big deal because it wasn't illegal is similar to talk I heard from Clintonoids in the 1990s. Caught with their hands in the cookie jar, supporters of Bill and Hillary Clinton argued that they may have been immoral, but it didn't matter because it wasn't illegal. Now, whether it was illegal or not is irrelevant. The fact is, Donald Trump Jr. was happy to meet with people he thought might have connections to the Russian government and who had information damaging to Hillary Clinton. Trump Jr. didn't care, and that makes what he did at the very least sleazy. However, since the news broke, Trump defenders have engaged in mental gymnastics that not even Ripley would believe. Convinced the meeting was nothing but a setup by Democrats, their delusion grows deeper day by day to the point where Alex Jones is giggling at the absurdity of it all. The basic premise of their theory is Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya worked with Fusion GPS, the opposition research company who helped put together the infamous Trump dossier, you know, the prostitutes pissing on him in a Moscow hotel, that dossier. Working with former British intelligence officer Richard isn't this a great, wouldn't this make a great porn name? Dick Steele. Dick Steele. Veselnitskaya accomplished this in part due to the efforts of the Obama administration's Justice Department, i.e. the Commissariat of Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up, allowed Veselnitskaya to enter the country despite an earlier denial of a visa. Also at the meeting was Rinat Akhmetshin, another person with a shady past with ties to Fusion GPS. Trump supporters believe the meeting was set up with the implicit purpose of using it to damage the Trump campaign and make it appear as though they were in bed with the Kremlin. Are you dizzy yet from the gymnastics? To believe this fiction requires one must first accept the Obama Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up Commissariat knew in 2015 that Trump would be the eventual GOP nominee and therefore allowed Natalia Veselnitskaya into the country despite a visa denial to get the ball rolling on the plot. Second, the meeting was set up by Democrat operatives and Russians working on their behalf as a means of furthering the narrative Trump was under the influence of the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin. There's just a wee bit of a problem. In June of 2016, that narrative had not even taken hold. It didn't even exist yet. WikiLeaks hadn't even published the DNC emails at that point. That didn't happen until the following month. And finally, the big question to ask is this. Why wasn't this information leaked before the election? Trump supporters argue it didn't get leaked because they were certain Hillary would win? Huh? They went through the trouble of setting up a meeting to further a narrative about Trump, yet didn't leak it to the press because they didn't think Trump would win? On what planet does this make any sense? Now, granted, Democrats excel at incompetence these days, but nobody is that incompetent, except for Donald Trump. Trump supporters selling this snake oil want you to believe a conversation like this went down. Hey, Lynch allowed that lawyer to stay in the country. Okay, good. It's October 2015. Let's try and get this meeting set up with Frito in June of next year. Got it. When completed, how long do we wait to leak it to the press? Well, why would we do that? Well, to damage the Trump campaign. Oh, we don't need to do that. Hillary's going to win easily. Well, then, so why are we doing it? Well, based on the off chance that Trump by some miracle does win, we can release it down the road. It will play into the narrative Putin controlled the Trump campaign. That's a narrative? It will be a year after this conversation takes place. Okay, how about this? If Trump wins, we'll release it in July of 2017. Middle of the summer. Nobody is paying attention to politics. People are wrapping up their summer vacations. What do you think? Perfect! Brilliant! They'll never suspect anything. For the sake of all that is holy, ladies and gentlemen, why can't Trump supporters just admit that Trump Jr. only cared about getting damaging information about Hillary Clinton and didn't give a rat's ass who had the information? Occam's razor, ladies and gentlemen. There are those on the anti-Trump side making the silly argument that the meeting amounted to an in-kind contribution to the campaign, and since it involved foreign nationals, those contributions are illegal. That is also ridiculous. But please, people, spare us the goofball conspiracy theories. I know, that's the coin of the Trumpoid realm. All eyes on Jared Kushner, or back to Jared Kushner. Susan Wright headlines at Red State on Monday as questions arise about security clearance and Russian social media bots. Everything just keeps pointing back to Jared Kushner, doesn't it? That at least seems to be the case as more voices on both sides of the aisle begin to call out Kushner, or for Kushner to lose his security clearance. How many times has he amended his security clearance paperwork again? During the run-up to the election, social media saw a flood of egg people supporting Donald Trump. That support included pushing a lot of the conspiracy theories against Hillary Clinton. Now, we've talked about the egg people before. Those were the near-anonymous posters to places like Twitter, usually with no profile picture, only an egg, and names like Trump Girl 32344 or MAGA 99279. They almost always have a string of numbers behind their Twitter names. They usually have a handful of followers, often fewer than 20, and follow even fewer. These egg people are actually bots, and the belief is that most originate from Russian sources. You imagine how the KGB would have used social media? You imagine how they would have used the internet? And then you remember that the current ruler of the Russian Federation is an ex-KGB agent, which is kind of like being an ex-Marine. In other words, ain't no such animal. The question now is whether Jared Kushner, who ran Trump's digital campaign operation, coordinated with those Russian bots during the campaign in order to further promote his father-in-law. Kushner has had to turn in 2 amendments to his security clearance paperwork. That's the answer to the question I just tossed out there. So far, so it could change. And there are many who say enough is enough. This is a quote from thehill.com. Most of the attacks on Kushner have been partisan, but even some Trumplicans, fed up with the drama surrounding Trump's family, are now calling for Kushner's exit. I'm going out on a limb here, but I would say that I think it would be in the president's best interest if he removed all of his children from the White House. Not only Donald Jr., but Ivanka and Jared Kushner. Representative Bill Flores, a Texas Republican, told KBTX-TV last Thursday, close quote. Yeah, I bet he gets primaried next year. Donald Trump Jr. has no role in the White House, for now anyway, but his actions as a surrogate for his father during the campaign have got him neck deep in the most recent Russiagate firestorm. And speaking of partisan, returning to the Hill.com article, it's very hard for me to imagine anyone else being allowed to continue their clearance if they participated in a meeting just like the one that just became public. House Intelligence Committee Vice Chairman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, told The Hill in an interview. Of course, if it were President Rodham and Chelsea Clinton had done something equivalent to what Donald Trump Jr. did, I'm sure he would have been just fine with it. Tribalism, ladies and gentlemen. Schiff is also probing whether the Trump campaign's analytics operation made any attempt to help Russian social media trolls push negative stories about Mrs. Clinton to certain valuable segments of voters. He declined to name Kushner specifically, but the first son-in-law headed that arm of the campaign. The data and digital director for the campaign, Brad Parscale, said Friday, or maybe it's Parscale, said Friday that he will speak to the panel as part of its investigation. Now, let's be honest, folks. Most already knew how awful Hillary Clinton was. She was a corrupt, bumbling mess. That's how she lost. That's why she lost. And she legitimately lost, and Trump legitimately won. The problem was with the flood of extras that had no basis in reality. In the lead up to Election Day, a loose network of hackers, bloggers, and other online figures helped spread false and negative reports about Mrs. Clinton on Twitter and Facebook to millions of voters living in key states, cities, and precincts. The network used armies of social media bots that run automated functions to accelerate the spread of reports. Investigators are looking into whether Russia identified its targets with the help of the Trump campaign's cyber operation, which had detailed information about voters, according to McClatchy, close quote. And all too often, as we've seen and will continue to see, this painted as a partisan issue rather than an American issue. I mean, after all, Pizzagate didn't happen. Blood orgies and spirit cooking? The ramblings of the intellectually void. And very likely the workings of those without the best interests of our nation at heart. We were going to be royally screwed no matter who won the 2016 election. We didn't need the help of a hostile foreign government. If someone from Trump's camp did indeed employ the help of Russian bots, then that needs to be investigated as well. Posed the question yesterday, and by the way, there's leftovers from this stack that we'll have on Open Thighs Friday tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. But Eric Erickson asked yesterday, what's there to hide? What is Donald Trump Jr. continuing to hide? Now, maybe we are all missing something, but knowing what we know now, it seems there is nothing to hide about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting, so why keep hiding stuff? The Trump team botched the handling of this matter so royally, so badly, that the press could dribble out information. First, there were 4 in the meeting, then 5, then a spy, then 8 people attending the meeting, including an embezzler of $1.4 billion for the Russian mafia. Oh, it didn't happen. Then it might have happened. Then it did happen. And now? I mean, the entire debacle is an exercise in how not to manage a crisis, and it begs the question, what is there to hide? What more is there to hide? What is there left to learn? And frankly, because of the fake transparency by Donald Trump Jr., can anyone really trust that everything was revealed, even if he does supposedly reveal everything? Perception, ladies and gentlemen. The president's agenda, whatever the hell that is on any given day, and the presidency itself are being sidelined by a scandal that did not have to be. The president's son and son-in-law, had they engaged in actual transparency instead of fake transparency, could have killed the story on day one. Instead, they made it worse. Even Trumplicans now have a growing sense that there is something being covered up. While Trump's diehard loyalists, or Cult 45, are now suddenly learning Russian and reading up on Bernie Sanders' honeymoon to plan their own vacations, a significant number of Trumplicans are not suddenly going to cheerlead Vladimir Putin. The ongoing entanglement between this White House and the Russians will only hurt the president. And we should not be surprised if, come next year, a number of Trumplicans willingly stay home and hand races to the Democrats just so Congress will actually aggressively probe what looks more and more like the cover-up of something nefarious. The odds are there really is nothing there, but with the way the Trump crime family is behaving, one can be excused for thinking otherwise. We'll pick this up in 22 hours on Open Thighs Friday. blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. See you tomorrow.